Okay, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're digging into something absolutely fundamental to the US dollar. Its power, its position, it affects everyone.
It really does. And we're looking at this primarily through the lens of Kenneth Rogoff's book, Our Dollar, Your Problem, using insights from various sources covering it.
Right. Our mission really is to unpack the core arguments from these materials. What's surprising? What do you really need to know about where the dollar's been and maybe more importantly, where it might be going?
And Rogoff's perspective is, well, pretty unique. The sources stress his credentials: Harvard professor, top economist, sure, but also former chief economist at the IMF.
That IMF background is huge, isn't it?
Absolutely. It gives him that insider's view the book highlights. He's seen how the global financial plumbing works from the inside, talk to the policymakers.
So it's not just theory, which probably explains why the book's making waves.
Yeah.
The Economist called its message timely. Financial Times recommended it. People are paying attention.
Yeah, and I think it's because it pushes back against this, this common assumption.
Which is?
That the dollar's dominance is just fixed, unshakable. Like it's always been this way and always will be. Rogoff basically says, hang on, let's look closer.
Okay, so let's do that. What's the absolute core idea Rogoff puts forward in these sources? The main thesis.
The central point is really this.
Yeah.
The dollar's preeminence, its top spot today, it wasn't inevitable. It was never actually guaranteed.
Okay, not guaranteed.
And this is the kicker. Its future stability is far from assured, really far from.
Far from assured. Wow. The book even suggests it could potentially be.
What? The sources quote him saying its dominance could plausibly be overturned. Plausibly. That's a strong word, considering how, well, embedded the dollar is.
Plausibly be overturned. Okay, that definitely challenges the status quo thinking. So if its rise wasn't guaranteed, how did it reach what the sources called this lofty pinnacle? Was it just pure American economic muscle?
Well, economic strength was part of it, obviously. But Rogoff, according to these materials, points to something else, too. A significant element of good luck.
Good luck, seriously. For the world's dominant currency. That sounds kind of random.
Yeah, it does seem a bit counterintuitive.
Yeah.
But he means favorable circumstances, things lining up right at critical moments.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just passive luck either.
How so?
He talks about the competition. The dollar had rivals it specifically had to beat out along the way. It wasn't an empty playing field.
Interesting. Who are the main competitors that the sources mention?
Well, thinking historically, the Japanese yen was a contender at one point. The Soviet ruble during the Cold War in its own sphere. And then more recently, the euro was seen as a significant challenger when it launched.
Right. I remember the buzz around the euro potentially taking over.
Exactly. The dollar navigated past those challenges. So it's a mixed strength, yes, but also timing, luck, and outmaneuvering rivals.
And all that led to this period, the sources say, Rogoff calls Pax Dollar. What's the idea behind that term?
It's an analogy, right? Like Pax Romana or Pax Britannica, periods of relative peace or stability under one dominant power. So Pax Dollar refers to this era where U.S. dollar dominance has arguably provided a framework for relative global financial stability.
The kind of financial world order centered on the dollar.
Sort of, yeah. But the key point Rogoff makes, drawing on those historical parallels,
is that these eras don't last forever.
Precisely. The sources emphasize his view that this Pax Dollar period may not last indefinitely. It has an expiration date, potentially.
Okay, so its rise wasn't fated. Its current stability isn't permanent. This is where it gets really compelling. What forces does Rogoff identify today that are challenging the dollar and maybe threatening this Pax Dollar era?
He points to several things, kind of coming from different angles. You've got external challengers, for starters.
Like other countries.
Other currencies, specifically.
Yeah.
The sources mention new contenders like cryptocurrencies, which is a whole new ballgame, but also, very significantly, the Chinese yuan.
Crypto. That feels like a very 21st century threat compared to another nation's currency.
It is. It adds a different kind of pressure. But beyond direct currency rivals, the sources also mention this growing frustration from other countries.
Frustration about what?
About being so dependent on the U.S. dollar system, on U.S. policy decisions. That feeling can, create a real push to find or build alternatives.
You can definitely see why other nations might feel exposed.
Okay.
So direct competitors, user frustration. What about just the basic economic environment?
That's another big one. Rogoff stresses that the economic conditions that kind of supported the dollar's reign are shifting. A really key point highlighted in the sources is the end of reliably low inflation and interest rates.
Which we've certainly felt lately.
Exactly. That whole long period of stable, low-cost money, that's changing. And that changes the whole dynamic for currencies.
Makes sense. And then there's always politics, geopolitics.
Yep. General political instability around the world plays a role. But Rogoff also specifically talks about the potential fracturing of the dollar bloc.
The dollar bloc, what does that mean?
It's basically the group of countries whose economies are heavily influenced by or even pegged to the dollar. If that bloc starts to weaken or break apart, the dollar's global foundation gets shakier.
Okay, so we've got competition yuan, crypto, other countries looking for options, fundamental economic shifts, inflation, interest rates, and geopolitical fragmentation. That's a lot from the outside, but Rogoff also points inward, right, at the U.S. itself. Something about exorbitant privilege.
Yes, and this is a really fascinating, almost paradoxical point he makes. Exorbitant privilege. That's the term for all the advantages the U.S. gets because the dollar is the global reserve currency.
Like being able to borrow more cheaply, having U.S. assets in high demand. Sounds pretty good.
Oh, it is good in many ways. But Rogoff's argument, according to the sources, is that this outsized power and exorbitant privilege can actually backfire. It can become a source of financial instability.
Wait, the privilege itself causes instability. How?
The sources explain that this instability isn't just something that happens out there, affecting other countries. It can hit home. It can cause problems domestically within the U.S.
Okay, that's a twist. Global power causing domestic trouble. How does that connection work?
It comes down to attitude, essentially. Rogoff suggests it fosters American overconfidence, maybe even arrogance, a belief that the dollar's position is untouchable. And that overconfidence, stemming from the privilege, can lead policymakers to make mistakes, what the sources call unforced errors. Bad policy choices made because you think you're immune to consequences.
So the very belief in your own invincibility makes you vulnerable.
Exactly. That overconfidence can, in the long run, actually undermine the dollar's stability. It's a kind of self-inflicted wound.
That adds a whole different layer psychological, almost to the usual economic analysis. And maybe that comes from that insider's view we mentioned earlier, seeing how decisions actually get made.
I think that's fair to say. His time at the IMF, dealing with global leaders, likely gave him insight into how power and perception shape policy, sometimes for the worse. It's not just numbers, it's human factors too.
So let's try to tie this all together. Based on these sources covering Rogoff's work, what's the big picture, the main message you walk away with?
I think the most compelling takeaway is just how fragile, or at least how non-permanent, the dollar's dominance might be. Rogoff builds this case that it's facing real pressure from multiple sides.
Right.
You've got the external rivals, the yuan, maybe crypto down the line. You've got changing global economics, like interest rates going up, geopolitics shifting, and then crucially, this internal risk, the U.S. potentially undermining its own position through overconfidence linked to its exorbitant privilege.
So that Pax dollar era, it's not something we should just assume will continue indefinitely.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
These sources strongly suggest we need to question that assumption. It forces you to look at something that feels like a constant, the dollar at the center of everything, and realize it might not be.
Which really leaves us, and you listening, with a pretty big question to chew on. If Rogoff is right, if the dollar's top spot isn't guaranteed, if it's facing all these threats, economic shifts, new currencies, even potential U.S. missteps, what would a world with a less dominant dollar even look like? Think about that. How could that change global finance, international relations, maybe even your own life? What part of this deep dive stands out most to you?